Good evening and welcome to this special meeting of the Common Council for a charter revision workshop. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Burnett. Mr. Goldstein,
Here.
Mr. Lopez. Ms. Najolski Eichner,
Present.
Ms. Smith,
Here.
Ms. Ayers. Present. Mr. Seed,
Present.
Mr. Wiggins. Ms. Young. Ms. Edie,
Here.
Ms. Winterstrand,
Here.
Ms. Dunn. Mr. Sutton. Mr. Frere,
Here.
Ms. Shanahan. Eight.
Darlene joined.
Darlene joined?
Yep.
Okay, so we have nine present. We have a forum.
Thank you. Moving on to public participation. I don't see anyone here in the chambers, but is there anyone online who would like to speak?
Diane Lorcho.
Move her over. And let's see here.
Good evening, Madam President and council members. My name is Diane Lauricella. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You have 3 minutes, Ms. Lauricella. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I wanted to applaud our city and the council and the commissioners of the charter revision for spending the time to make important changes in an important document in our city's history. The reason I wanted to speak tonight briefly is because I unfortunately was not able to listen to the last meeting you had. I think that was with the commission. I wanted to first of all state that if you should decide to bring forward to our next election the 4-year mayor term, I ask that you separate it out from any other measures that you will contemplate tonight. Why is that? Because there are a lot of very good changes that have been made, and the 4-year term, the 4-year term for mayor is something that is quite controversial. Unfortunately, I was not able to ask my state legislators to have a special act so that we could possibly have term limits on 4-year terms. That is possible, even though the attorney said it wasn't, but it is possible. Secondly, I wanted to ask that you allow and consider, even if it's a separate item, an expansion of the city council. I have had conversations with some of you. The reason I had put it forward, and I was so pleased when Jim Clark and Ed Camacho both said that one good reason was to allow for a chance to reduce the work. Many of you are on 3 to 4, in case of Ms. Dunn, more than 4 committees. I know that many of you, at least half, work still or have lots of family obligations. I ask, in all the years I've observed the council, I would like to see the council spend more time doing their own due diligence and not just being subject to what the staff and their consultants say, but also it would allow you to be more contemplative. I know many of you work hard, but some of you do not call back your constituents, even if we've asked for months. And I will say that maybe this would allow you to free up some time and to talk with your constituents one-on-one. Lastly, I ask that
30 seconds remaining.
Yes, if you decide to approve the 4-year mayoral term, I do ask that as soon as the next charter revision is assembled, that we think about pulling back some of the appointment and make it fairer for instance, Board of Estimate, where the council appoints half of the Board of Estimate and the mayor appoints the rest. Thank you, and I look forward to your deliberations tonight. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ms. Laricella. Is there anyone else online who would like to speak? Please raise your hand. I don't see anyone. So I will go ahead and close public participation. And moving on to review proposed charter revision. I do just want to make one announcement now, and we'll do it as well at the end, that there will be a public hearing next Tuesday at 6 o'clock prior to the regular common council meeting at 7:30. So the public hearing will begin at 6, and we will have deliberations. We'll continue our deliberations after the public hearing. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to move on. We're going to jump ahead just so that we can discuss the more items where we have more discussion and in the interest of time. So we are going to move on to Article 10. When we finish with that, we will move back to Article 4. So let us move on to Article 10. The commission recommends a number of changes. Some of those changes are stylistic or organizational. Others may point to the process to another direction in the future. 10-1A, 1 and 2, the commission recommends moving these two definitions. Minor change. 10-1C, the commission recommends adding the superintendent and chief financial officer of the Norwalk School System, as well as the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, to the joint hearing panel, which currently consists of the mayor, chief financial officer, president of the Common Council, chair of the council committee authorized to review the budget, chair pro temp of the Board of Education, chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and F, a member if the Board of Estimate and Taxation of the Board of Estimate Taxation designated by the mayor. Is there any discussion on that item? Moving on to 10-1D and E, the commission recommends recodifying these provisions, which are currently 10-2A and B and 10-11 in order to consolidate the estimate and pre-submission requirements for both the operating capital budgets in one place. Any discussion? Moving on to 10-2A, the commission recommends the new introductory language in this provision. Discussion. 10-2B, the commission, building on the 2023 Commission's affirmation for public accountability, adds another public meeting of the chief financial officer of the city and Board of Education with the committee of jurisdiction of the council and Board of Education to give the members and the public a preview of the budget status. Any comments? I think we all agree that that's a positive. Okay. 10-3, the commission recommends submitting the operating budget to the Common Council on the same day it is submitted to the Board of Estimate and Taxation, February 15th. I think we all agree. 10-5, the commission recommends adding a provision that would effectuate the cap established by the mayor in the event the council fails to do so on or before February 28th. Ms. Nadjelski-Eichner.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I have suggestions for other aspects of 10-5. I have no problem with this particular recommendation. Do you want to talk about other possibilities for 10-5, or should we hold that until after we finish reviewing what the commission is recommending and then move on to additional suggestions?
No, let's move on.
Okay.
No, actually, no, let's not. Sorry. I think, we'll move through this. I think that this is, where we want to spend our time. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and make your comments and recommendations.
Sure, thank you. So in 10-5, which again, I'm fine with the changes proposed by the commission, but I did want to make an additional suggestion. So in this provision, this is where the council sets the total appropriation for the city budget. And my recommendation is that we, moving forward, actually make that recommendation in two separate chunks. So we always talk when, when we get together, our whole debate about this is about the percentage increase for the school budget and the percentage increase for the rest of city budget, right? This is how we talk about it, it's how we think about it. But then the vote we take is for the whole thing. And so I think it actually would make more sense. It would be more transparent. It would be easier for the community to understand if we voted for on the same day, same time, everything the same, but we vote in two separate chunks. So we'd have line item number one, the school budget allocation, line item number two, the rest of city allocation. And so that's a suggestion I would like to make for insertion in this 10.5. I think it would be 10.5A that would go in there.
Thank you, Ms. Najewski-Eichner. And I am aware that you did reach out to Attorney Mednick in terms of legalities around this. So I'm going to ask Mr. Mednick to chime in. If you don't mind, Steve.
So what I think the proposal is to have a separate maximum limit on the Board of Education appropriation or cap. And that would be entirely permissible. It would be a change from where you are right now. Oh, I'm so sorry. I could have gone up there. I apologize. Now I could drop the mic when I'm done. So having the two separate caps is an interesting proposal because both the council and the Board of Estimate have really nothing to say about what goes into the Board of Education budget. So if you establish the cap and it has to be adhered to, the council then gets the authority to establish the bottom line for the Board of Education budget. That would be perfectly permissible.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a brilliant idea, Ms. Najewski-Eichner, so I'd like to commend you for that. Ms. Ayers.
I have a serious question. If the proposal is to spice out capping both the BOE and then the rest of, I believe Nora said, the rest of the city, I think we're setting a precedent that someone needs to be concerned with and careful with. The school, Norwalk Public School system, the BOE is a part of the entire city. They are a department of the entire city. They are not a separate department from the entire city. So when you're doing stuff, and this is really asking a question about precedent, what are you saying to the other departments? What are you saying to the other departments? And Nora is right. Our conversation is usually split that way. Even though I kind of said we need to talk about it in a different way. I'm just really concerned and thinking about the other city departments, what we're saying if we do it this way. I have said publicly, I will continue to say, it's not that I do not support the Norwalk Public School System, but I think our language and how we treat them, we do need to understand it is a department of a city. It is a part of a city. And when we start splicing things out, I'm afraid that sends a message that I don't think is the intention of Nora, but I just am unsure about that. And that messaging and what that says to other department heads and what does that say about funding for those departments. You know, DPW sits on the top of my head because I had a constituent call about garbage cans, but what are we saying about DPW and the needs of DPW when we're not giving them the same attention as we're giving one particular? She's the superintendent, the Board of Ed is a department, the superintendent is a chief who meets with the mayor, like all the other chiefs. So I just think we need to be mindful of the perception of that.
Nora.
And do you mind if I, Madam President? I couldn't have said that better. It's one of the battles and discussions that we have throughout the state of Connecticut. Boards of Ed like to be treated as if they're separate entities, and they're not separate entities. They are a department, and that's why the law in the state of Connecticut permits the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, to request the line item budget of the Board of Education. It's why the Board of Education is obligated to provide that information to you. The difference, though, is again a statutory difference. The difference between DPW or the Economic Development Department or the Corporation Council is that you have, or the Board of Estimate has absolute line authority and the mayor over all those departments. You do not have line authority over the Board of Ed. And so the concept of setting the cap gives the legislative body, where I'm sure a lot of people come before you, I could be wrong, I'm sure stand at that podium and argue with you about giving more money to the Board of Ed. It makes those public arguments more salient, more pertinent if you ultimately have the authority to establish the cap. So it's distinguishable only because you can't deal with their line items. You can't modify their line items. You can see what the proposed line items are. You can ask them for reports during the course of the year, like any other department, to your point. But the difference is you have no authority over their lines. And so the only authority you have is over the bottom line. That's why it would be treated differently. I agree with you completely, but they are different because of the statutory privileges that they have.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. I think some other provisions that I want to suggest sort of relate to the ways in which they are as accountable as any other department. But as Mr. Mednick said, and maybe the phrasing of this, maybe this would be the useful phrasing to think about, is that we should have a vote on the cap for which the BOE makes the line item allocations, and a vote for the cap on which the BET makes the line item allocations. Because ultimately that's what it is, right? And so what I would like to do is have it be clear to anyone who's interested, the amount of money that each body has to do line item allocations with.
I like the idea personally. I think, but to Ms. Ayers' comment, I think it's worthwhile, and I think it's something to be concerned about. On the other hand, we get a lot more transparency with the other departments. Many of the departments come before the committees. They go through their budgets. We go through them very thoroughly. The Board of Ed is more difficult to get the degree of transparency that we get in other departments. As Mr. Mednick said, Attorney Mednick, sorry, stated, we will have a lot more control if we can put a cap on what their spending is. And if it kind of forces them to tell us on a line by line basis where they're spending their money. We can't adjust any of their lines, but we can give them a limit as to how much they can spend. And that forces them into giving us or explaining to us in greater detail where they're spending their money.
Mr. Colson, thank you. I would just to piggyback off Councilmember Freya's point. I mean, two things. One, Councilmember Ayers, you are correct, and obviously I don't want to repeat the things that Steve and Councilmember Freya just said. The one thing I would note, and Nora, maybe you can speak to this a bit more, because I know when we talked about this idea, one of the reasons to do it this way is to actually hasten the process whereby the city and the Board of Education actually turn over their line-by-line budgets earlier, so that the public has more time and access to the line-by-line budgets. Frankly, in light of some of the stuff that's going on now, where a lot of the understanding of what's going on in the budget sort of didn't get released until later. This is actually, as I understood it, was a measure to also compel a bit of earlier public transparency in prospective budgets, but Nora could speak to that better than me.
I was gonna say, you stole my thunder, Josh.
That's
I was actually trying to lead you in.
Part two,
I was trying to-
no.
As a segue.
Yes,
part two of her recommendation.
Right, but no, totally. I'm glad you entered this, Josh, because this is the second half then of, and what doing this, having this separate vote would then allow us to do is to create a new provision. And I think I would defer a little bit to Attorney Bednick. Whether it's a new provision it probably needs to be a new provision in both Part 9 and Part 10. Is my guess. But what I'm proposing this new provision would do is then require the Board of Education to provide a line by line operating budget for the Board of Education to the BET and the Common Council by middle of March, March 15th. That allocates line by line to the new cap set by the council. So what this does is it means, so what has typically happened in the past, let me start with where we are right now. So right now, what happens is the BOE does their budget in December, January, like all the other departments, and they give that to us. And it typically is a request in the 6, 9, 11, 14, whatever percentage range. And then we consider that and we put a number in for what the cap is. And again, we right now vote on a single line, but we talk about it as if it's two separate caps and we think about it that way. And very rarely is there any moving back and forth between them. So in practice, we set a cap then. But there is currently no requirement that the BOE then produce a budget that lives within that cap until they get to the end of the fiscal year and have to do their budget for the new fiscal year, which is what has happened over the last few weeks. And as we all know, has created enormous chaos and confusion. So by setting a cap clearly at the end of February for the BOE, we then, and I've confirmed with Attorney Bednick, we have authority to do this because as you say, Ms. Ayers, they are just like any other department in the city. We can then require that as of the middle of March, in plenty of time for the BET to still review in relation to their deliberations, and plenty of time for it to come back to the council in relation to our deliberations before the April 15th deadline, a budget that shows what will happen within that cap we have set. And so all of this conversation that's currently happening would have to happen in March. And I think that would be a tremendous benefit to everyone in the city. I think it would be, far more transparent, far clearer, and again, is fully within our authority to do. And I think would greatly improve the process for all of us. So that's what I'm hoping that this sort of part 1, part 2 step would achieve.
Thank you, Nora, for that. And, I want to add, so what I like about the two provisions, one, first is that, there have been times where amendments have been made on the floor to increase the cap. There have been amendments in the past to reduce the cap, right? And so what it allows for us to do is if, because we have hoped in the past, some of these amendments would have provided additional funding for the Board of Education. So once it goes to the BET, we have no control, right? So it fixes that frustration that we have had when we want to make sure that we're supporting our schools, right? And so that I like that part. And as you referred to, Ms. Nadjelski-Eichner, I mean, this has just been an unbelievably stressful time for our students, for our parents, for our teachers going home from the school year not knowing, what their position is going to be, and they still don't know. So having that line by line report to the BET on March 15th, will prevent all of this from happening, because we're really in a crisis. So I just really want to thank you for your brilliant thinking around this, Mr.
Well,
C.
thank you. And sorry, the one last thing, I know Jalen's, but the one last thing to add on that is that then it also does allow us to have time and the ability, if we see something that we need to fix, and we can then do it, as you say, directed specifically to the half of the budget that we think needs fixing. And that I think is the other advantage here, right? It allows us to have this kind of conversation in a coherent way with a little less crisis and a little more, let's think about this the way that we should. So I'm sorry, Mr. Seed, I apologize for cutting you off there.
No problem. I think this is a great idea. My only question is that, yes, we could set the cap, but once we send it to the BET could lower it. And if we're saying for the Board of Ed, then to fit like pretty much line by line within the cap that we set, then once the BET goes through it, and if they were to cut it again, to lower it. Now they gotta do that over again. And then even with those cuts, they have to go through all of the schools and make the necessary cuts of where they're gonna do it line by line. So we're asking them to pretty much do a line by line item budget 3 times. And I understand the time, so that we don't have this crisis. But I just question that, because yes, we set the cap. And then if they have to do the line by line, by the time it goes to the BET is still gonna go through it and address that.
I think Mr. Jusky-Eigner has another recommendation around that, so.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
And I do respect and understand the rawness of the current situation, and not taking from that at all. But I'm kind of thinking in the future, and I think that's part of our job. This charter will live with us for a certain amount of time. And I think even though a lot of the reactions are because of what is happening to us, people have a feeling of what is happening to us. I respect that. I just feel that I applaud Councilperson Najolski-Eigner for her recommendation. I just have to say, and it's not against anybody, we need to be careful when you start opening Pandora's boxes. We need to be careful, even if this amendment, if it is passed with this wording, gives us more time. I think a larger issue is the council is not fully aware of what's in the coffers. So we are presented documents from the CFO, and that's the document we see. We are not fully abreast, and I guess I'm telling the clubhouse secrets, but oh well. We're not fully abreast of everything that the city is working with. So when we are making decisions, we're making decisions based on what is in front of us, not necessarily with all of the information given. I think that's a larger problem, or part of the problem of us even setting any type of a cap. If it stays the way it is, or if it's divvied into the recommendation that Councilperson Najolski-Eigner has. I frame it, if I'm doing my household bills, I know what's in the bank account, so that I'm able to budget because I know what's in the bank account. We are given superficial numbers, whereas I know we're not supposed to call it the rainy day, but that's fun. We're told that's what it is, but then even in this process, and again, I'm looking out to the future, I'm not steep into what this process, in this process, money was then found, I'm using that word loosely, found to assist a situation, which I don't think any of us were aware of that. We dealt with what was in front of us. So I just think it's not, again, nothing against the amendments that Nora is raising. I think something needs to be done with giving us the council a full picture of what we're working with, so that we can make the best decisions with all of the information.
If I can just add to that, so the way I understand where this additional $3 million came from the city is, as the city has reconciled its budget for the year, these are funds that have not been used by the different departments and have become available. And so, which I think is why keeping, the cap, making sure that the cap, and we have that line by line return information from the Board of Education is so important, because there's not always leftover money from the city, right? So it happens that, in some departments, they had these additional funds, and we are able to do it this year, but that does not mean that we will have that opportunity in the future. Jim, I think you were next.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that, is that, when we're doing these budgets at the end of the year or at the beginning of this year, we're still 6 months away from knowing what we needed to spend in this particular budget year. Some of the questions I used to ask on the BET was that people would come in and say, after, in March, and say, okay, I need $10,000, the classic example, which I see in just almost every department. I see $10,000 that you're asking for in quote business expense. What's that for? Well, it's for this and that and the other thing that comes in. Okay, we're in March now, we're 3/4 of the way through the year. how much you've spent. Okay, and sometimes, gee, I don't know. The answer then comes back, well, I spent $5,000. So why are you asking for, spend another $5,000 in the next 3 months? Well, no. So why are you asking for $10,000 for next year? And so when we do that reconciliation, that $5,000 comes out. Every single year, we look at the BOE budget. They always come out with a surplus at the end of the year. And that's where some of this money comes from, okay? And you're never gonna get around it because we do our budget very, very early and we don't recognize what the extent of our spending is gonna be in many cases. But the Board of Education also does a lot of spending in June. They see that they've got money left over and they'll spend it, which is not, if we had a cap on that, maybe they wouldn't be able to spend it. Okay. The other thing though, that I did want to mention on this, are we going to go to item C on this?
We're moving through everything.
Because I have a question on that, but I'll go back to Nora to finish this conversation up because I just didn't want to miss C.
Go ahead, Ms. Nadolski-Eichner.
Sorry, just a couple of quick things. So one thing I do want to be really clear on is that nothing that I'm proposing here actually changes our authority. This will make more transparent what we are doing, but this is actually what we have done all along, right? We set the cap for that applies to the BOE and the BET and all of the above. I just want that to be clear. I don't want people to be confused that somehow we're getting more power. It's just literally a different way of representing it. So I think it's important. The second thing I will say to Ms. Ayers, there's another proposal that I have coming up on getting the council the ability to have their own finance staff. As I have said for years, we cannot have independent understanding of what's going on if we do not have independent staff independently evaluating the budget for us. So I very much agree with you on that point. And I also would say that in general, again, this is all sort of, working within the system we have. There is a totally different system wherein we have line item authority, which is what almost every other legislative body in this country has. And then a lot of this goes away. But that's a different question and a different provision. So this is a suggestion working within our existing system to be able to maximize transparency. And I also want to say to Mr. Seed's point, I do think that it is possible that, we could add a provision that they need to do a line item budget based on the council cap, and that they need to do a line item budget based on the BET cap. And then it could come back to us and we could change that again. That's all totally possible. That's also a completely realistic, honestly, expectation because they should be doing that all along, right? In the same way that the departments are also following along with what's happening and evaluating whether their operating requests are going up and down based on what the BET is recommending. And truthfully, I think the heavy lift is the getting it from whatever the 9% is to whatever our 4% is. And then if there's a small tweak with the BET, that's going to be a much lighter lift. But that really is the information that parents and teachers need to know. And yeah, the point is that it is going to be hard and challenging. And, it's possible that they may need more than 2 weeks. Maybe we need to bump out by 3 weeks or, so to make this happen. That's something we need to get feedback from them. But the reality is that they have to do it anyway. And the earlier that they are forced to do it, the more realistic the conversations we have. And again, this is pretty standard practice. Like if you paid anyone paid attention to the Board of Education budget debates happening in towns around us, they were having fights about this kind of stuff in the spring. So Darien, there was a plan to cut a gifted and talented program that parents pushed back on. And I remember reading about it and thinking, wow, they already know in March that if they're going to make cuts, this is what they're planning on cutting. So the parents were able to mobilize not around a sort of generalized number, but around a specific plan. And then they could evaluate, realistically, should we, increase the amount of funding available to make sure that cut doesn't happen. So I just generally think it's to the benefit of everyone, even though it will be a change and it will require some hard work in March. That said, it may also encourage more realistic budgets in January and December because they're going to have to do it in March anyway. And so, the hope may also be that it incentivizes a more realistic budget from the get-go.
One of the things, I don't recall if this was in an email from you, or if we spoke on the phone, Nora, but I think, the idea is, is it possible to push out our budget dates a bit, because we are really early, and that gives us, a little extra time. And then additionally, one of the things that I think we might ask for is, the final budget from the BET comes back to the council only if they increase it. I wonder if we can ask for it to come back to the council if they make any change, increase or decrease. And the
Yes.
reason I ask that is because, I often think about the experience we had in 2021, where, what the council approved in the budget process was, it was a 2% increase for the Board of Education, which even that I recall, me personally thinking that even that felt kind of punitive. Because the superintendent had just come on, and I had my concerns about that. And so then the BET in their role, because the ESSER funds had come in, and everyone was thinking about the taxpayers, and I don't fault the BET for making a decision that they thought was in the best interest of our residents at the time. However, that was the year that they zeroed out the they flat funded. We had no choice but to accept it. And I would have liked to, my personal feeling is I would have liked to have seen that come back to us. So I don't know, if we want to kick around that idea, but I would like to see it come back to the council, regardless of its increase or decrease.
Yes, and to be clear, I think that the changes that were made in 2023 did clarify that it now comes back to us. So I think that is the case now. If you look at 10.7A, I do
Yeah,
think
that
that it
wasn't
now
clear
comes
to
back
me.
to us. But as you say, the issues, and I'm happy to talk about this I don't know if there's anything in between now and there. The problem then is that if it comes back to us and we make a change under 10.8, the BET can just take that change right away, basically. And so in essence, the council has no actual authority here. And this has happened. I will remind you, I think 2 years ago, I think 2022, the council allocated an additional $1 million. And the BET just said, we're not going to appropriate it. So they didn't.
Mhm.
So our decision to say we need more money was ignored. And so I think that change, from my mind, that change needs to sort of be made. It needs to come back to us. And if we take the time and effort, if we say, we appreciate what you've done, BET, nonetheless, we're making a decision as the elected body that we think this, decision needs to be overridden in some way, up, down, increase, decrease, whatever we need to do, that should control. And I think there's a couple of different ways we can do that. One way is sort of would be to say that the BET, that it comes to us from the BET, and then we as the council then can do a full line item review, right? That would be a way of keeping the BET's role with fiscal oversight. They'd still be the primary reviewers. They would give us a recommendation. But we could, as a council, then say, we're going to override you, on these lines. And we could do that. I had suggested, I think, to folks that we could do that with the same 2/3 requirement that we currently have in place. So that would be one way to do it. It would give the council a significant increase in authority, but it would still maintain a pretty important position for the BET, because it would still require us to have a supermajority in order to do it. It would still be in the face of the BET having made a different recommendation. It would still have, I think, quite a lot of fiscal control. And I think, this is generally a relatively fiscally conservative city, a relatively fiscally conservative body. I don't have a lot of concern about us going wild on stuff. The other option we could consider is same kind of concept, but limiting our authority to make line item decisions only to the amount that we are increasing or decreasing. So we could, when it comes back to us, if we want to override, which again would require a 2/3 vote override, when we do that override, we could specify, what the override is to be used for. So those are, I think, two sort of options, both of which would give us more authority than we have now, both of which would still be in the context of maintaining our system where the BET has the majority of the authority, but it would be a difference from our current system wherein essentially we are and have been historically overridden by the BET on the rare occasions when we have tried to do something different. And I didn't mean to skip to this quite so fast. If I missed anything, we can go back, but I will just add my plug on this. This is something I think I've said before, and I feel truly passionately about. There is a sort of fundamental premise in American government that the elected officials are where the buck stops. That at the end of the day, the voters should have a right to hold accountable the people who make the decisions, particularly on things like fiscal matters. And I have been bothered by the BET process since I got involved with this, because under our current charter, the buck actually stops with unelected officials. And to my mind, that is fundamentally undemocratic. And it also is really contrary to the intuition of our residents, right? We have this happen to us all the time. As people were just referencing, people come up and they demand to know, why haven't we fixed this? Why is the council not doing this? And it is tremendously unsatisfying to say, under our charter, we don't have the authority to do it. And I say to people, I'm not trying to make an excuse. I'm telling you how this is. We actually can't do that. And I think when it is consistently clear that our voters think that the system is different than it is, when I think that we have the capacity within this body to make these decisions, we do not make them lightly. The agonizing that has happened every year around this budget, we are serious people who take seriously our responsibilities. We are also people who sit in the committee meetings and are knowledgeable about what our city needs, what our departments are asking for, what the impetus is behind them. I feel personally that we are highly qualified to do this, particularly if the process has already been vetted by the BET. They've already asked all the questions, and we are merely considering the one or two hot button issues that have really sort of risen to the surface, where we are hearing from voters and voters are asking us to take responsibility for them. So that's my feeling. And I think, just sorry, Council President, I really jumped off what you said, but that is my feeling as to why this matters so much to me, that we do something to increase our ability to be held accountable for to have the authority to be accountable for the things that voters want us to be accountable for.
Yes, thank you. And I know, we have some mixed thoughts on that particular thing. Mr. Steve.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate the steps for transparency, because I think that's something that has been asked for loudly by people in all, especially these last couple of weeks. However, I just want to be clear that the issue with the schools and the funding is, we could go back and forth with it, but the schools, like, we're paying for most of the education. I don't have the percent, but like the city is paying for a big chunk of the education of our students. We're not getting the same return per pupil to really make it equitable. The towns that's around us that are brought up a lot of times in the comments when it comes to Board of Education, they're getting more, or just the towns are a little bit more affluent where they're able to spend more on education. So it's not equitable. We're not getting the playing field isn't being leveled by the state. And that's something where I think that it's not in our power as council members to fix that. But I just don't want to, I just want to just put that on the record for people that might be watching, that this issue is multifaceted. And this step that is great, is a step really to just be more transparent in our process. But for us to come in with things that we care about, like special education and band and sports for the kids and different things like that, if we could fund everything, we would. But the ramifications of like fully funding a lot of these requests would raise the taxes for a lot of people, and we just have a trickle down effect on people. And that's the thing that we double with every budget cycle. And this is something that's not new. Last night at the Board of Ed meeting, a teacher said, we've been sitting in these meetings together for 15 years. So it's not, this is a crisis now, but this is we have like the same kind of thing going every year, and now it's just to the point. So I really do appreciate it. That's not to take away anything from Councilperson Jill Geithner's statement. I just want to put it, or tremendous efforts to really make this more transparent. I think that's going to go a long way. But I just want to put on the record that this issue is not just with us saying no, or us not having the power to give the Board of Ed what they need. It's we need a lot more help, to get it across the
Absolutely,
finish line.
absolutely. And I don't think there's any question, it's certainly been talked about, for years, that the number of unfunded federal and state mandates that are put on our schools is really challenging, really challenging on the backs of our taxpayers. So we definitely need more state and federal help.
I just want to have one other quick thing, just to piggyback off what both of you just said. Which is, two things can be true at once. On the one hand, we're very proud of our state delegation who goes to bat for us and who has brought back, millions and has helped actually increase the ECS formula to help get us more money. But as Councilmember Seed said, the problem persists. And one of the other culprits is that primarily in states and cities across the country, and Norwalk is no exception, education is paid by property taxes, which is a fundamentally unequal way to fund education, because it's literally the quality of education is going to be dependent on the affluence of the residents. And personally, I think that's wrong. I know I'm not the only person on this panel who thinks that's wrong. And there is a broader problem, which is that a lot of the mandates, as Council President Smith said about everything, I mean, especially special education being the biggest one of these, are tremendously costly. And it is a considerable struggle. It's not to make excuses, it's just this, and by the way, Nora, I'm gonna give you a plug here. Nora, I thought, wrote a very good op-ed piece in Nancy on Norwalk along these lines. And I know we've all kind of spoken to this, but I do think that's an important point. So Councilmember Seed, thank you. So, and I think Jim
Sure.
wanted to.
Did you have something, Jim?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about, what is it, 10.5C exemption of grants from maximum taxation. Basically, this is saying that we're not going to talk too much about or we're leaving out of the fact, we don't look at revenue enough in the budget to begin with. And although this doesn't address that, but this also takes a look at, after we've identified a cap, if a grant comes in, a federal grant, a state grant, whatever it is, that may give us, and this goes a little bit to the Board of Ed. So let's say, I was going to say the Department of Education, but that's crazy. That's not going to happen. But say, just out of the blue, we got a big federal grant for a particular special education program. And it's after the cap has been decided. Now, that's not going to influence the cap. The cap stays where it is, but it does influence what our expenses are going to be. So it really reduces the budget that the Board of Ed would be asking for. So I think that it would be important to not only look at just little revenues that we have out there in the budget, and there is revenues in the budget, but we never concentrate on them. But grant money, if it's coming in after the cap has been completed, that's going to definitely impact our taxes. Our taxes should go down in the event we got a significant rate. And we've never done it, and it looks like in this case we're leaving it out again. That's it.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. He said, Councilperson, Breyer said 10.5C. I thought we were just changing language in that one, am I?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
taxation.
They were. But in addition to that, I think that this is something that we should be recognizing. That changing the language is no big deal, but behind the language behind it is what I just said, is that grant money comes in after we've established a cap. The budget is not recognized that grant coming in.
No, my clarity point is, are you offering an amendment to it, or you're just making a statement?
I would like to offer an amendment to it if I could. But I don't know whether that's appropriate.
Yeah, we don't have to do that right now, but yeah, that's not what we're discussing.
We're only
tonight.
discussing
Yeah,
it.
we're workshopping tonight. Okay, so,
No,
is there-
excuse me, Madam President, please don't.
Sure.
Blaze over what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm asking if you're offering an amendment, are you gonna give us the language so that we can then
Okay.
That's what I'm asking for, that you give us some language so that we can look at it in conjunction to what is present. Not like right now, but in a reasonable amount of time, can you give us the language so we can?
Exactly, actually, we just get the exemption out of it.
So you just wanna change a word? I'm just trying to be
Well,
clear for
it's-
people who are following us.
It, my.
There is no
my
exemption.
Intention here is that it would not be exempt.
Right.
Can I ask a question about that though? Because are you saying you would not be exempt for the remainder of the budget process? So for instance, it would have to be, if the grant came in between, because right now it's exempt if it comes in between, February 28th, if it comes in February 28th and going forward, it's exempt. Are you saying that it should not be exempt if it comes in while we're still debating it? So they have to update the budget. So if it comes in between February 28th and April 15th, it should be included in the budget? Or are you saying that if it comes in, in August? So I'm just trying to figure out what exemption, like, is it,
The budget's done.
right?
Between the time we set the tax rate, okay, by the time we set the mill rate, I would like to see the grant be taken into consideration. So in other words, for example, it may lower the budget for the BOE if it was a special education windfall or something, or they've got a new state program where they're going to assume some of those
Right.
very high expense items. So that's going to bring their
So
budget down.
it should probably be moved to 10-8 is what you're suggesting, as opposed to 10-5. So it's just moved later in the process that kicks in.
Yeah. You
I don't know, we don't, but I think that would be helpful to think about where in the process you want.
We're not gonna make it tonight, so I'm
Yeah.
throwing it out there. I think it's worthwhile taking a look at. The chances of us having something that's gonna be material may not happen. And I think my note to you the other day I was kind of skeptical, this morning was kind of skeptical about any such thing would even happen.
But just
What
an
I
event
recommend-
of if it happens, you want it there. Just an event, if it happened, you want the language there.
Yeah. Because it's gonna help us.
So what I recommend is you write up, what you'd like to include.
Okay.
We can have that for discussion on the floor next week, after the public hearing.
But I also respect Councilmember Pierce's, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, are we ready to move on? All right, so we are at 10:06. Okay. The commission recommends replacing the term "any alterations" and replacing with "proposed changes." Okay. 1010A, the commission proposes elimination of the requirement to establish a limit on expenditures at a special meeting.
My own question is, what's the rationale for that?
I think just so we could do it at a regular meeting as opposed to a special meeting.
Yeah.
At least that's how I read it.
I would agree with
I
that.
agree with that.
Yeah.
10-11A, the commission merged this provision with 10-1D.
Mission of estimates.
Yeah.
10-11B and C, the commission recommends these new provisions that establish 1 submission, 2 notice and publication, and 3 public hearing requirements for the mayor's proposed capital budget and capital improvement plan.
That's good.
Okay.
I mean, it's a lot. I can't remember tell if it's later or earlier. I'm assuming it's later.
It's just more relevant.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any later.
Well, I don't know, because Mayor of the Mayor says he must submit to the Board of Estimate and Taxation and the Council on or before February 15th of each year, the mayor's proposed capital budget.
But I think at the beginning it says.
It's
December.
later. It was December 31st.
Right. And but the final plan is, are you talking about the final plan? Well, this is the capital budget book. That's what they're talking about here. So they're basically, even though capital budget discussions happened earlier and happened in that November, December range, I think they're asking for a couple extra months to submit the book to us. And while I think that this is consistent with practice, I just want people to be aware of the fact that it seems like they're basically seeking an extension here of time in the charter.
But I do think it is consistent with practice, right? I don't
Consistent
remember
with
having ever
practice,
gotten.
which is the one, and
Yeah.
which is another way of saying they haven't been doing it this way, even though it's in the chart.
Right.
But
And I don't have a problem with that, in the sense that, as we talked about, our budget is actually done quite early in general, like, and there is some benefit to having more of the state process have played out, have more information, like, I don't have an issue.
True. No, I don't have an issue either, so long as they do it then, because, but the capital budget is a month-long process that usually we end up voting on by the middle of April. So 8 weeks is about enough time for us to sort of get our bearings and meet with departments and have our meetings like we did 2 this year. And met with every department, but I just saw this and, talking it out made it better. So I'm good.
And again, I think if there is an amendment to push any of, capital or operating back a little bit farther into May, I have heard no reason that we couldn't do that and give everyone a little more breathing room. Unless, again, the CFO may think otherwise, but it's always felt like a little bit arbitrary in terms of being done so early. I don't know. So that's something maybe we can ask the CFO.
Yeah, okay.
I apologize, Madam President. I realized that there was one additional point in the operating side that I forgot to bring up. And this just reminded me, 'cause it's another meeting provision. So this is actually a suggestion Councilmember Burnett has made. But I did, since he's not here, I wanted to flag it. And I think it is a good suggestion, which is that the council and the BET have a joint meeting, which is
Yes.
something we've never done, but I think would be very helpful.
I agree.
And so I think the suggestion had been to add that in, I think it would go in between. I think it would go sometime in sort of between 10-6 and 10-7. So during the BET's deliberations, late in that process perhaps, or maybe as the BET is about to transmit it back to us, or I don't know where exactly, but that would be my, and again, that might be something we're talking to the CFO to get an exact date suggestion might be helpful. But I did want to not forget that I thought that was a good suggestion of Councilmember Burnett's.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And Mr. Burnett and I have talked about that as well. So, okay. Where are we at? It's 10:10. No, sorry. 10-12. The commission recommends minor alterations to the content of the CFO's report. 10:13, that was quick. 10:13, the commission recommends restricting the planning and zoning commission hearings to the capital budget, not including the capital improvement plan. We also recommend including members of the common council among those who shall meet with the planning and zoning commission. The recommendations made it clear that the sole function of the planning and zoning commission is to assess the alignment of the capital budget with the plan of conservation and development.
To be honest, I think what that means is if anything, you're putting one council member to sit in on a P and Z meeting. And P and Z's function in the capital budget process is, I'm not gonna say ceremonial, but I'm gonna say basically making sure that any capital budget conforms to the plan of conservation and development, which is a relatively low burden. So I don't necessarily have a problem with it. What it means is that probably the person who's the chair of the Economic Community Development Committee is gonna be the person doing that. But I like it that it's vague so that if for some reason that person can't serve in that capacity, if there's conflict or whatever, someone else could do it. Do I think it's necessary? No. Do I think that it's
Harmful, also no. So.
Well, I mean, I think the benefit to it would be that when the capital budget comes to the ECD committee, you have that,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
usually
additional
they,
information.
and usually they provide some sort of a
Mhm.
transmittal letter. And sometimes they will make recommendations if they think there's a project that they especially want
Okay.
included. So for example, the P and Z Commission this year wrote a letter to the mayor and to the Economic Community Development Committee recommending the insertion of the East Avenue corridor traffic study, which is and was passed as part of the capital budget. So I have no issue with this.
Anyone else? Okay, 10-15, the commission clarifies the role of the Board of Estimate Taxation as an advisory function insofar as the capital budget is concerned.
There was a little, I think, dispute this year, and I think it's more or less fixed that.
Moving on to 10-16, the commission recommends several changes, including clarification of the reinstatement authority and establishing a clear public hearing requirement.
Madam President,
Yes, go ahead. Maura.
so, the reinstatement issue here, language has always said that the council has the authority to reinstate items, and it's never been clear what that means. And so I appreciate the Charter Revision Commission attempting to clarify that. I personally would prefer that it go in a different direction. So the way that they have done this now is that the council has the authority to reinstate any transfers that the BET proposes should be, so any items that the BET proposes should be transferred from the capital to the operating budget. In truth, that's an incredibly minor power and not one that I think is particularly significant. And what I would rather see instead is a treatment of what I think I have always been under the impression this provision should mean, which is that the council has the authority to reinstate projects that were proposed by the departments that did not make it into the mayor's capital budget plan. And the thinking on this, and this is Mr. Ferrer, you and I have talked about this a little bit. The way that this system is set up, which I think is a very good system, is that we have sort of a 5-year plan, right, of things that need to be done. And the departments put a tremendous amount of time into developing those plans, highlighting the items that need to be done. And sometimes the mayor says that the project that they would like to have done in 2025 can be put off till 26, 27, whatever. And sometimes the council feels like actually that project is more urgent. It needs to be bumped up. We disagree with the mayor's determination that that item can be pushed off. So I'm not suggesting that the council should have the authority to event new items, but I am suggesting that if the departments have an item on their 5-year plan and the mayor has not proposed the item for this year, but instead for a subsequent year, we should have the authority to move it up to the current fiscal year. And that, to my mind, is what reinstate has always implied to me as to what that power should be. But this has never been clear. I fully concede that my interpretation of it has been hotly disputed with Corporation Counsel in the past. But I think we have an opportunity now to clarify that. And again, I think that's a very reasonable power to give to the council. We are not going to go willy-nilly. These are items that are already on the 5-year plan. The departments have already vetted them. But we can all think of situations, I think, where the council has an opinion. The fire station obviously is one that comes to mind, that something needs to be done sooner rather than later. And this is something that happens in the course of the process anyway. Sometimes, the mayor puts forward a proposal and then items get shuffled back and forth. And I don't see any reason that council shouldn't have similar authority based on needs that we have seen in the city. And that would be my suggestion for addressing this within 1016 as an alternate way to handle it.
I've only had one thought about this, and I remember when we had an opportunity to meet with the Charter Revision Commission. I know, Nora, I think both you and I both spoke about this and about how this language was, as you said, sort of ambiguous and unclear. Here's the fact pattern that I'm not sure I have the answer to, maybe you've thought about this, which is there's a project that's proposed by a department. The mayor has decided not to recommend that program. It's still part of the capital budget submission. Council looks and says, hey, we really like to fund project X. We then fund the project, we pass the capital budget, we funded project X, but the mayor still doesn't want to do it.
Mhm.
And the department head of whatever department this is still reports to the mayor. And if the mayor says to the department head, hi, I know the council voted to, fund project X, but I would prefer that you work on these projects first because this is actually not a top priority for me. It's the reason why I suggested that it not be funded. The council and I have a disagreement. So the mayor tells the person who works for them, I don't want to do this. What happens then? Because then what's our enforcement power? What's our mechanism in which we can compel the mayor to say, you have to do this, and compel the department head who while we vote to confirm them, is a direct reporting directly to the mayor, right? You have to do this. So now we're at this impasse. And I don't actually know the answer to what happens if that situation occurs.
And I think that the answer is what the answer has always been in relation to all of the capital items, right? I mean, there is a reason that there are capital items sitting that we approved and they're 4 and 5 years old and have never been done, right? I mean, the answer is at the end of the day, you're absolutely correct. The mayor still makes the final decision. But if we have approved the item, then it is sitting there, then it can be acted upon. Then if the mayor, for instance, comes to realize that we were correct and there is in fact an urgency to do this, then the mayor can do it because we have authorized it, right? So that is, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, at the end of the day, then that is true of all of these items in the capital budget, right? That has always been the case. At the end of the day, we authorize the appropriation, but they are not actually acted upon until the mayor chooses to do so.
Mr. Freya.
I think this is really treating the effect and not the cause in some respects. I mean, we see a lot of items in our capital budget that are not capital items. They're routine repairs and maintenance. And I think you said the same thing in our conversation, or that how many times we're putting patches on things, which is part of our capital budget, we're putting a patch on. That's not a capital item. That's a maintenance and repair item that should be in our operating budget. And we talked a little bit more about that. But I think with your 5-year capital needs assessment, there's ample time for, I think, us to take a look at that capital needs assessment, discuss it with department heads, and then make our case to the mayor. We really think that it's an appropriate thing that has to be done. Particularly if it's been pushed down the road for year 1, year 2, year 3, to go and talk to that department head and help him lobby the mayor to explain what the reason for this is. I mean, that's where we should be taking care of it. The thing with the firehouse is a great example of kicking the can down the road on the maintenance and repair side of it. This is what happens. We also have the same thing with a roof on one of the, I think a roof on the same building. Or the school, I'm sorry. We're not going to repair that. We're going to patch that roof instead of repairing the whole thing. And that's what happens. And what's happening too is these are our operating expenses that have been pushed over into the budget, and we can we are hiding, I shouldn't say hiding. Okay, we're reallocating out of that operating budget so that we can make our budgets look really very lean and mean. Okay, and we're pushing them into the capital budget where we can push it off for another 5 years. So I understand what you're saying, and I think that rather than reinstating something after the mayor's kicked it out, that we should be advocating right at the very beginning. We're looking at those capital budgets when December. I think it's in December or January, it's one of the first things we look at is the capital budget. We also should be looking at that capital improvement. I don't think I've ever really looked at, other than in the capital budget, because you've got the 5 years blowout there, but we never really talk about that too much.
Yeah, I'd like to add a comment, and I agree with you about the maintenance, which is so important and needs to be part of the operating budget. And I think if there had been maintenance at that fire station as a part of the operating budget, and there's the whole building management issue as well, it would not have gotten to where it got to. But I do just want to, I want to express my concerns about the reinstatement because what the issue was with the fire station, that was a $4 million project, right? And if we wanted to reinstate a $4 million project, that requires such a depth of discussion, understanding of the debt service, and I would just have real concerns about that. I'm not sure that unless we really have that financial expertise and the level of meetings with the CFO, with the BET, that's necessarily a responsible thing to do. Ms. Ayers.
So let's flip the coin a little bit. If we have a capital budget projects that this body, not the individuals currently sitting here, but this body feels needs to be brought forward for the overall benefit of the city, then this body should have the authorization to do it. We do understand, as Nora says, just because we're authorizing it doesn't mean it's going to be acted upon. My issue is, I never want public administrators to feel pinned or like their backs are against the wall. The individuals have spent a lot of time putting studies together, putting proposals together, crunching the numbers. Our job is to take what is presented to us, ask those needed questions if there's holes and whatever, and make that decision. So if the capital plan is presented to us, we have the right and the ability, because most of our departments are under one of our committees, to flesh that out. So just to push back on what you were saying, Barbara, it's not that we don't have the expertise. I feel we don't have the time. It's not the expertise, because I think that due diligence has already been done because they had to submit it already. I think how we currently function, we don't necessarily have the time to do the deep dive, and many times instead of making an informed decision, we make emotional decisions based on what's just happened. We are very reactional as a legislative body, and I would like to see that stop, because sometimes in the reaction, that emotional response, we are not looking at the pennies but I think that information, I think the information is already there because they had to do the information. I think it gets kind of fuzzy because we're very reactional. Somebody comes and say something, and then all of a sudden we're very reactional. The charter presents us as a strong council weak mayor system. That's only on a piece of paper because we don't have the resources to fully flesh out anything. Let's just be honest. And I know in public comment, it was saying about making more, adding more seats. That's not gonna make us efficient. If anything, it's gonna slow us down. Because now it's just gonna slow us down. But I think for this particular item, it's less us reinstating and more us having time to make an efficient and educated decision.
Ms. Najolski-Eichner.
Thank you very much. And I think piggybacking a little bit on that, at the end of the day, we are or should be a co-equal branch of government, right? That is our job. We are not supposed to be advocating to the mayor for things that we want. We are supposed to have the authority to do them. Now, that doesn't mean that advocating with the mayor isn't a practice that we employ in order to get what we want. But I am I want to have co-equal authority. I want to be a co-equal branch of government. And in order to do that, we have to have more power as a legislative body than we have in this charter. Period, full stop. And I don't see any reason that we are not fully capable of doing that. I think very highly of the members of this body. We are people who care deeply, who spend an enormous amount of time, who are thoughtful and deeply invested in the work that we do. We spend a great deal of time with our departments. We have a great deal of understanding. Are we perfect? No. But that is the whole point of having a legislative body, is to have people who sit somewhere in between the staff and the general public. And we are supposed to have the benefit of being both. We are supposed to be able to look at things from the sort of higher level general public thought, while also having the time to spend with the staff to understand. And I think we do that well. I think that is an important function. I would like to see us have a little bit more authority to actually do that. So that's just my thought on this. And again, whether this is the exact right way to do it or not, but I do think that it is something we should seriously consider, because I think highly of all of you. And I think that you make good decisions for the city. And I'd like to see, all of you empowered to do that a little bit more.
Okay, thank you for your perspective. Anyone else? I think what we can probably do, we might be able to get through 10 here before we have to end up. We 10:17. The commission recommends modification of the grounds for termination or abandonment of capital items. Any comments?
For me, I think it's just a continuation of the previous conference.
Yeah.
That's just me, guys.
Okay.
I think it's a continuation of the previous conversation and how we're doing the job. Not that we're doing it, but the effectiveness of how we are actually doing the job. I don't think it has anything to do with the lack of resources and everything to do with how our time is spliced. Just me.
Item under Article 11, I'm sorry. Under the provision, the commission recommends retention of the mandatory charter revision every 5 years. Oh, this is going to be a discussion. Yeah, let's hold this to the next, meeting, because we do need to finish up here. So we're gonna hold,
Tune in next time.
yeah, Article 9. I'm sorry, Article 11. So we will pick up there. So again, we do have to end up because the community services meeting at 7:30. And we need a few minutes to carry over. So again, a reminder of the public hearing at 6 o'clock. It will be hybrid as usual. On Tuesday, the 24th, we will continue with our deliberations, and then the common council meeting will be at 7:30 as usual.
Sorry, and I apologize. Are we voting? When are we voting on amendments?
That will be, gosh, I guess it.
Well, I mean, I think we
Here's
can
my schedule.
the 8th.
I think it's the 8th. I think it's, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I just want to I want to get some
Have that
drafting
date,
done.
but yeah,
I think it's
it's the
July,
8th.
which
It's
is our
July.
first meeting of July.
Yes.
Okay,
First meeting of
perfect.
July. Okay. Motion to adjourn. Mr. C, motion to adjourn, all in favor? We are adjourned.